Saluti and welcome to Italy. I shan't do my dodgy Italian accent, I'll upset people. But anyway, welcome to Italy. We are in a time where a third of Europe has seen its population disappear. Well, not literally. A third of Europe's population has died from famine and plague. And no, it's not 2020. This is the 14th century. Okay, the 14th century was sort of known for various things, including the 100-Year War, the beginning of the Renaissance age, which sort of fits in with what we're doing. Okay, but also this is our theme for this evening: a medieval pie. Now, pies were very common in medieval Europe, and this is a late 14th century recipe from a cookbook that's sort of an anonymous source, the Anonimo Meridionali. Probably said that wrong, right? And it dates to the end of the 14th century. Now, like a lot of these old cookbooks, they tend not to necessarily tell you the quantities, and they also assume certain things. So, for instance, with this, it's a pie. It's going to be in a crust. But of course, everybody knows how to make the pie crust, don't they? So he never bothers to tell you how to make the pie crust. So instead, we're using a recipe that comes from other sources for making the pastry, or the pie crust. Okay, but the actual ingredients that we're going to be using today is a chicken pie. Okay, now these pies varied wildly across all of Europe during the medieval ages. This is a torta levinexa, and that didn't necessarily mean it had anything particularly in it, but it tended to have some sort of meat. Now, we're having chicken. Now, if we were doing this properly, I'd have parboiled this chicken, and when it wasn't quite cooked, I'd have stripped all the meat off, and I can't be bothered with that faff. Bloody hell. Been baking all day. So instead, I've got some chicken breasts here, which we're going to break up. Now, it also calls for some dates, some chopped dates, about 5 or 6 chopped dates, but also some raisins. Now, in the original recipe, it talks about grapes. They will probably have been dried. Wife won't eat them, not in food. So I'll put some extra dates in. So I've got some chopped jack dates there. We're going to add some spices. Now, in the actual recipe, he says to prepare this pie, basically you use chicken after you've parboiled and cut it. You add dates, grapes, whole cloves, nutmeg, which we're going to grind up, the whole thing, and the better spices that you have. So in other words, if you've got anything else, chuck them in as well. So we're going to be putting in some cloves and long pepper. Okay, they're all going to get ground up. Oh, and some cinnamon. And essentially that's all that's in our pie. Just some spices, some dates, some chicken, and a little bit of broth. So, get yourself an ale, although I suppose because we're in Renaissance Italy, you could have a wine, but ale's quite common. So, get your ale, sit back and enjoy. So, we're going to start by taking 2 nutmeg, okay, and we're going to pound them in our, not really a Mexican, mortar and pestle, right? Molka. Little tip, don't try and hit the nutmeg from point on, don't want to break, like an egg. So we just pound the nutmeg until, makes a lot of noise there, until we've sort of broken it up. We take our cinnamon, so I've got about 15 inches, I don't know, 10 inches worth of cinnamon. I'm going to chuck that in there. And we're also, that's going to go fine, going to pound that up like I say, the cloves aren't going to go in here, the cloves are going in the hole. Get in there. We'll grind it in a minute, but we just break it up. Now, as I said, this is a time of a lot of change. It was the birth of the Italian Renaissance. And it was typical, particularly amongst the richer people, to entertain with banquets. Usually the first course will perhaps be fruit, and then it will be followed by a variety of dishes which would almost always, something went there somewhere in it, can't see it now, there it go, trying to hide under the pan. It would have included some sort of pie, meats, okay. Sometimes they wouldn't, they would also have various game, perhaps not in a pie, but pie was quite common, and they would use the spices that they had. Again, it was trying to impress people. I've got these exotic spices, no one else has got. Now, see, any time I have it else, I'd use my spice blender, but of course we're in 14th century Italy, so can't do that. So, just going to pound that a little bit more, and then we'll chuck our long pepper in. But before I finish doing my spices, what I'm going to do, because I've got some melted butter here, I'm just going to bloody rolling pin's got mine of its own. Oh, I've gone Middle Earth again. Right, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to coat this dish that I'm going to cook the pie into in some melted butter. Now, they almost certainly would have used lard, right? But we're not using lard. You could use olive oil if you want, or you could even flour it. But we're just going to do that with butter, so I'm going to do that before that sets too much. But we'll also probably put that in when we fry up the chicken, as it were, even though the chicken's cooked. Right, next thing is I'm going to put the long pepper in, okay? And then we're just going to also grind that up as well. So it's quite spice heavy, like I say, in some respects this was all about impressing, right? But what I can afford. So different spices would be used depending on availability and cost. Now, often, people sort of like go, oh, where's all the tomatoes? You're doing Italian tomato sauce, with everything pasta. Well, although pasta's been around the world, something flew out again then. Although pasta's been around a very long time, what you've got to remember is the tomato came from the New World, and the New World doesn't exist at the moment, no one's found it. So there was no tomatoes. So the introduction of like tomato sauce into lasagnas and things like that is obviously a much newer thing. So these spices getting ground up. Pepper's being a bit of a bugger. I've still got a bit of cinnamon in there trying to escape. So, like I said, what we're going to need to do is I'm going to put a bit of this butter in there, okay? Now, if you want, you could use olive oil or lard, remember? Okay, I'm going to put some butter in there, and then I'm going to take the chicken, and I'm basically just going to tear it up and put that in here. Now, like I said, if you wanted, you could just cook whole chicken, and when it's almost done, you strip all the meat off and chuck it in, and then use that, and then you'd finish off cooking it. What you're trying not to do is have it too dry, and that's one of the problems with obviously using pre-cooked meat like this. Okay, we've got to be careful we don't dry it out, but we will be adding a little bit of broth. Okay, would be chicken broth, but only have stock cubes. and I prefer the old stock pots. So we got a vegetable. I shouldn't say vegetarian. I suppose it's vegetarian, isn't it? We got a vegetable stock, so we'll add a little bit of that. Right. So it's basically just a matter of putting this in here, and then we will put in the other ingredients. So let me just wash my hands, turn that off, and then perhaps I'll tell you a little bit more about medieval cuisine, which we have done a little bit on in another series, but we can carry on. Right, so we put our cloves in whole, and then we put our spice mix in. Okay. And then that's more or less ready to go. Okay. Oh, and then of course our chopped dates. So they go in there. These are dried dates. So we'll have to see how we get on. And then I'm going to add some chicken broth. Okay, now I might end up adding a little bit more. But before we get on starting to cook that through, because it doesn't need an awful lot of cooking, remember, because chicken's cooked. What we're going to do is we are going to make our pie crust. Now, using semolina flour. Okay, now that's a sort of really good flour for making what's the name with? Pasta with, and also for making pastry. Now we're going to need to roll 2 sheets. One is going to be just slightly smaller than the top, and that will be a thin crust, and that will sit on top. And then we have a slightly thicker. So one of the things that was traditional with the pastry and the pies was you'd have a thicker base. So we have a thicker layer, but that will also be bigger than that dish. So to start with, we tip out our flour. We make a little well in the middle, and we add a little water, and then we gradually mix that in. Now we'll probably need to add some more water. Okay, now that's all there is to this. Okay. Ooh, it feels a bit weird, this semolina flour. It's a little bit like fine sand texture. So we're going to make a fairly sort of firmish dough. We don't make it too wet. Okay. You can always add more water. I mean, I know you can always add more flour, but we don't want to go overboard too quickly. So it's just a matter now of gradually adding in water until we've got a nice dough. Okay, so my dough's made, and I've split it, because first off what we're going to do is we're going to roll a thin top layer. Now this plate is just about the right size, so I'm just going to roll that out, possibly not got enough dough, so that it's sticky now. I was just going to say it's not a particularly sticky dough, and the bugger's sticking. I'll have to put a little bit of flour down. That's there. Yeah, I'm not sure if I've got enough dough here. Ooh, almost. So, like I said, traditionally, I mean, every cook is expected to know how to do a pie crust, but the tradition was the top is a thin layer, and you would have a thicker layer on the bottom. So let's just cut that to size. Hey. Now I probably can't get the bugger off the table. Right, so that's my top crust. Now, this obviously was big enough because we want it to overlap, and we can always trim some off afterwards. Okay, so just going to roll this, and then, like I say, hopefully I've left enough dough here so that it's going to be thicker on the bottom. Now, we don't use like anything like an egg wash, we'll just use some water. And what you might want to do is part the way, don't you dare do that to me, you little bugger. Part the way through your cooking, you might want to just sprinkle some water or brush some water over the top. Now, get a little bit thin there. Now the idea will be that this layer will fold down over the top first. Okay, so get in there. It's not going to be that thick on the bottom. So what I'm going to do, no, that's not big enough. So you've got to go up the sides and overlap. So like I say, I'm just going to get this right, I'll get it in the dish and then I'll show you what it looks like. Okay, so my pie tin, as it were, is lined. Let me just move that over there, out of the way. So what we're now going to do is we're now going to cook this through. Now, we're just going to cook all this through. Like I say, if this was a sort of part cooked chicken, so we don't have it raw, but you would have it sort of like mainly cooked. You're only really just cooking it a little bit more, warming it all through, because obviously it's then going in the oven for about half an hour. There's my broth gone. So this is a little bit dry because the dates probably soak some up, the chicken soaked some up. So we're just going to add some more broth, and that's it. So this is sort of, like I say, a typical type pie, okay, that was used, or rather eaten, during the medieval times. The Renaissance period saw a lot of change. Okay, poor Gus got poorer, rich got richer. A bit like now, isn't it? But like I say, it was quite common for pies, and you wouldn't necessarily have the pie in it, like we'd have pie and mash and stuff like that. This would just be a course. So you might have 5 different courses at your banquet, or you might have different pies. Like I say, you start with fruit normally, you have pies, you might have some meat. Actually, interestingly, the recipe I got this from, a guy normally does Roman cooking, and I've just got his book, and he was saying about in the Roman times, things like boar and stuff like that were quite common. However, he quotes a famous Roman once giving back a boar. He was giving junk with chicken broth in, so in the ale, and obviously be ale or wine, by the way. Sort of more commonly ale. Rich you were, perhaps you might move to some wine. But like I say, going back to the Romans, this guy actually gave the boar back because he worked out just how much spices and garum, which was their sort of fish sauce, very, very salty, just how much of that he was going to need, so how much it was going to cost him just to cook the bloody thing. So he, thanks for the gift, but no, you keep it. But anyway, that was going back a bit earlier. So medieval times, I say fruit would be first, and then you might have some sweeter desserts later on. Okay, So I'm just going to let this heat through, and then we'll be putting it into our pie and get ready to put it in the oven. Okay, so we'll turn the heat down on that because that's just about enough. So now we're going to just have a couple of pinches of salt, mix that in, and then this is going to go into our prepared pie dish. So put it all in there. Now that's quite moist. So down there a minute. That's quite moist. So I don't think we need to worry about adding any more broth. Okay, but what we do now is we take pie crust and we lay it over there, and then we just brush around the edges with some water, and we just fold over to seal our pie. And a little bit of a gap there. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to glue a little bit of dough just over the top there, just to seal it. And then we're just going to give it a little bit of a going over with some water, and then like I say, what we're going to do is we're going to shove it in the oven for about half an hour, and then about halfway through I'm going to just go and just wet the top, so there's no egg wash or anything like that. The oven's been on about 160, 170. I should just tell you, yeah. So in we go. Set our medieval sundial to about 15 minutes. And then we'll be ready for some pie. So that's 15 minutes up. So what we're going to do is we're just going to pull it out and just give it a bit of a light sprinkle with some water, and then shove it back in again for at least another 15 minutes. There we go. Okay, so that's just over 30 minutes. Let's have a look at our pie. Ooh, come out. There. Try to avoid coming out, that did. So, got a little bit of brown, it's not going to really brown that much, bit of leakage. So, so the pie crust on top's obviously quite hard. I don't know what it'd be like underneath. So we'll cut it into quarters, it'd be a bit easier to get out. We should be cutting that with one of my best knives. We blunt the bastard. Right, so let's have a look. There's about a letter. Have that a little bit. So, there we go. These are medieval pie. Let's have a little taste of the contents. So, look at a bit of clove. Very sweet. Should imagine that's the dates. Nice and moist. So there we have our 14th century and late 14th century medieval chicken pie. Oh, pepper's coming through now. So enjoy. And by the way, I switched to white wine now. It's Italian.